videos on my channel says it like it is. It is rebellious and I stir in a hope to provoke intellectual thought, something that seems to be in short supply these days. I refuse to comply with societal etiquette that puts people's feelings ahead of logic. Unlike others, my videos offer real solutions to problems. In this video I suggest a solution that the world population be reduced to below 500 million, and that only a select few highly evolved people with high IQ and EQ scores that have no disorders or genetic diseases be allowed to procreate, with a one-child policy for a 20-year period. I suggest that this can be achieved peacefully and with full cooperation of everyone if the problem is correctly motivated by PR agencies. My suggestions are drastic, but we do not live in a perfect world. We live in a world that is heading towards an unprecedented crisis. The figure of 500 million is a random number. Scientists should adjust this figure if necessary, but never higher than 1 billion. I further suggest that state-funded elective euthanasia should be made available, and that people should be educated and their perceptions on euthanasia be changed with the help of ad campaigns, properly motivated by PR companies. Nobody would be forced to euthanize themselves. People that do not qualify to procreate should be allowed to live their lives out naturally. I also warn that never-ending and unprecedented scale war is going to occur simultaneously with global warming and extreme overpopulation if the solutions herein are not applied. This video does not promote Aryan race supremacy. Every country should play their part. It is suggested that all countries bring the number of their respective populations under control. I do not advocate the eradication of entire races, and I suggest that poverty should be rooted out once and for all. I cannot emphasize enough that I hereby do not mean that rich people should procreate and poor people not. To the contrary, if rich people do not pass the criteria, they must be sterilized. And if a poor person passes the criteria, the state should educate them, and assist them to succeed to escape poverty and their dire circumstances. I warn herein of the consequences of ignoring the gap between rich and poor, and ignoring the overpopulation crisis, and I suggest and fully motivate reasonings and solutions. The planet is in crisis. We are heading for a global disaster on an unprecedented scale. Global warming is threatening the very existence of life on this delicate planet. I refuse to tiptoe around political correctness. People need to wake up, because we are sitting on a time bomb with the global population exploding. I am not an alarmist. I have years of experience in the field of population and economics, and I cringe to see how people's minds are too small to comprehend the problem that we are faced with. Global warming is not the only problem we are facing. We are facing a global population explosion. We are heading towards a planet that might in our children's lifetimes be populated by 132 billion people, with 20 billion people being added to our global population annually. Let that sink in. 132 billion people. If you understand the concept of compound interest, then you would understand exactly why this figure is realistic, and why we should act immediately. We won't have enough food, oxygen or water, since there won't be uninhabited space to grow food. We need to ask ourselves now, at which point would it become okay to forbid people from having 12 children? If we can't enforce it now, how are we going to enforce it in future? People need to realize this and realize the magnitude of the crisis that we are facing. Every scientist zones in on his own area of expertise, and nobody addresses the overall bigger picture. According to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, we need to explore life on another planet, because overpopulation will kill this planet. That is ludicrous. We cannot possibly believe that to live on an uninhabitable planet is the only option. We have a perfectly good planet, but we can't keep doing things as we have always done it. We need to face the fact that this problem is too big and dangerous for small solutions. Radical action on a global scale is needed. Global warming's effects are uncertain. Unbearable heat, perhaps an ice age, erratic and extreme weather, desertification of previously fertile land, droughts, floods. The global population explosion necessitates deforestation, which accelerates global warming. One thing is for sure, if we keep growing our population in numbers, every square inch of this planet would be inhabited by suffering souls. The future needn't be pale. It is possible for the human race to not only survive but better everyone on this planet's standard of living. It is possible for humans to not only survive but thrive and live much better even with global warming's effects at its worst. But we need a radical and fresh approach. I realize the measures herein are controversial and extreme, but desperate times call for desperate measures. We do not live in a perfect world. We live in a world facing the biggest crisis that humanity and this planet has ever faced. The solution, Reduce the planet's population to below 500 million people and don't ever allow the world population to grow beyond this figure again. A global overseer like the United Nations would have to implement and enforce these solutions. Here are the solutions. Only an incredibly small amount of people must be chosen to procreate. The best scientific minds in the world must create a criterion to allow only the most evolved humans to procreate. People with the highest IQs, intellect, and EQ, empathy, must be identified and solely allowed to procreate. A computerized program should ensure that this is not based on affluency, the country of origin, race or religion. It must be 100% objective. Everyone on the planet must be afforded an equal opportunity to be selected to have children. I am not a Nazi, fascist nor a racist. In fact, I believe that most Aryans would fail to qualify, because they lack empathy. I am not advocating getting rid of entire races, nor to allow only Aryans to procreate. To the contrary, I advocate that there are Aryans that should be prohibited from procreating. Equally, any person from any race that qualifies should be allowed to procreate. All countries will continue to exist. Each country would have people that would qualify to procreate. No country or group of people will be wiped out or picked upon. The aim is to eradicate poverty. The only way to do this and meet the urgency to drastically reduce the world population immediately is for everyone to realize that we are either all going to suffer or all going to prosper. This robot voice fails to convey my sincerity. I do not say the things that I say in this video out of hatred or superiority. I know suffering on a personal level. Believe me, I have been there. I know what it is like to be the mother of a disabled child. I know what it is like to see my mother suffer from dementia. I have seen humans battling cancer, migraines and illnesses. I know what it is like to not have money for petrol of rent or education. I am asking for the solutions in this video for myself, and for my children and parents. I am not a rich bitch looking down on people and forcing these things down their throats. I love people, and I hate suffering. I am not trying to be hurtful with the solutions here, and to the contrary, I want to help all people live better. I am not saying that we should discriminate against people for being poor, sick or defective in some other way. It is not anyone's fault that they suffer, but the aim is to eradicate poverty and disease so that there would never be suffering on this planet again. I truly hope that you would view this as my love for people and not wrongfully see me as a hateful human being. I suggest that only a very few selected individuals must be allowed to procreate, with a one-child policy for a period of 20 years whereafter a prohibition on the number of children would cease. Low IQ doesn't mean poor, and poor does not equate to a low IQ. Rich does not mean high IQ either, but only people with an IQ above 110 must be allowed to procreate. In order to procreate, both the mother and father must already possess a tertiary degree. I know this sounds unfair, but in a world where we are faced with a crisis, only the highest qualified people should be selected to have children. In a perfect future, we need all decisions to be taken democratically. Machines will replace manual labor. There won't be work for people that do not have tertiary degrees. It is a sad reality, but a reality, nonetheless. It is a proven fact that people with the lowest IQs and low or no education have the highest population growth rates. Radical action is needed to prevent those that do not qualify from procreating. Unlawfully born children should be sterilized immediately. There are cheap pills that cause sterilization. Yes, inhumane and awful. I get it, but we cannot keep sitting back and think this problem is going to solve itself. No radical action leads to no radical result. People with genetic diseases should also be disqualified from procreating. This includes but is not limited to cancer, ADHD, autism, blindness, deafness, migraines, mental illness, etc. We want a planet free from disease, pain and suffering. Similarly, people with addictive personalities, alcoholics, or a history of drug or alcohol abuse and gambling problems should be disqualified from procreating, as well as people with a history of aggression and violence or a criminal history. We want a planet free from crime where no one would ever consider dishonest behavior. Unemployed, displaced or suffering people, or people that will not be able to provide comfortably for their children must also be disqualified from having children. I realize how discriminatory this sounds, but discrimination is not the intention. We need to prevent displaced people from letting children suffer in a world where circumstances are set against those children thriving, especially in a world where global warming is going to make it impossible and expensive to survive and thrive on a dying planet. I have no problem with artificially achieved pregnancies in future. But for at least one generation, people that are infertile or struggling to fall pregnant naturally should be prohibited from procreating, since there is a good chance that their offspring would also be infertile. Furthermore, people with no regard for rules and laws should be disqualified from having children. This is important, so please let this sink in. My message comes across as heartless, but although I say it straight out as it is, it comes from a place of deep love for people, and an understanding of what suffering is. Well off people show poor people sympathy. They feel sad for their dire circumstances. They wish that they could make every person that suffers his life better. Everyone hates that there are people living in poverty. Everyone wishes that they had a magic wand to alleviate suffering, but no one can wave that wand to make poverty disappear. Believe me, poverty is going to get far worse very quickly. People with low intelligence will never ever escape poverty. This is where the population explosion is taking place among people that are not able to escape poverty, because they are not able to perform intellectually challenging jobs which pays well. Yes, we do need to feel sorry for lower intelligence people, and that is exactly why we should not allow them to procreate further. Poverty is going to become worse and worse for them. Stop showing your sympathy for lower intelligence poor people by allowing them to procreate uncontrolled. If you really care about poverty, then help put an end to it once and forever. Stop forcing generation after generation of poor people to live in extreme poverty and unemployment. Put an end to this continuous suffering and hardship once and for all. I am not saying that people of low intelligence must not be allowed to procreate to be nasty. We need to stop the cycle of suffering. The gap between higher intelligence and lower intelligence is widening by the day. With that, the income gap widens. Experts say that we must educate everyone on Earth. But this has been tried and it failed miserably, because the population numbers are exploding faster than ever among lower intelligence people. Low IQ and EQ people are centuries if not millennia behind people that has had formal educations and challenging jobs for thousands of generations already. Don't pull poverty and suffering along for the next 200,000 years. Stop poverty and suffering now. Again, I'm not trying to be nasty, I cry for them. Most live awful lives. In my area they typically live in cold shacks that leaks when it rains. They commute for hours daily to do hard labor that takes a toll on their bodies, just to earn hardly enough to cover their very basic meal for the day and their transport. They don't have money for doctors and luxuries. Some work more than one job, insane hours 7 days a week, and still do not earn enough to buy more than basic starch food. It is an inhumane existence. This needs to stop. Education is the key to eradicate poverty. But the hard reality is that uneducated lower intelligence people have far too many children as a general rule. The population is exploding, especially under uneducated people that cannot afford to care for and educate their children. This will keep these poor people forever in a poverty cycle, and this gap between rich and extremely poor will keep rising as long as the population numbers keep growing under undereducated people. Undereducated people work for educated people, and soon there won't be employment for the majority of the humans on this planet. Again, an ever-worsening poverty cycle, which will cause hatred and violence amongst poorer and more well-off groups. The financial cost of education falls on taxpayers. It is fair to say that everyone on this planet should be entitled to an education, only if people have far less children. When people have 17 children, that burden of education and services cannot possibly be met. Just there lies the problem. Just there the state cannot afford to educate anyone, not even those with only one child. The world needs to eradicate poverty, and this will never happen as long as the population figures keeps rising. Please understand, we need to drastically reduce the number of people on this planet. It is going to be expensive living through global warming. If we are going to have to tell some to stop having children, then it is the humane place to start. The alternative is that everyone is going to suffer. The planet cannot sustain more than 500 million people. This figure is probably already far too high. Global warming is evidence of this. Every country must do their bit to reduce their population numbers. Again, I am not trying to sound mean, but I say it as it is. The extremely poor and unemployed do not pay tax and is a financial burden on any economy. Even if some countries fail to cooperate, the remaining countries must all still do their bit to reduce their population numbers. In an economy without unemployed people that places a burden on taxpayers, everyone would thrive. It would be much easier to provide food and water and other resources to fewer educated, economically active people, than to carry an exploding population of lower intelligence unemployed people. Sorry that this sounds so heartless. First world countries must sponsor third world countries with the financial cost of euthanasia and sterilization, because overpopulation is everyone on this planet's problem. Everyone on the planet wants to be part of the dream. No one likes to be left out. It is a question of time before first world countries are going to be faced with aggression from third world countries because the income gap is so wide. I am a pacifist and very much against war, but we need to do whatever needs to be done to reduce the population numbers, even if this means force or war. Everyone on the planet must be eligible to take the test to qualify to procreate, but everyone on the planet must pass the same test. No exceptions may be made, not even if you are rich. People must be encouraged to accept the result with grace, and in the realization that a really small number of people would be eligible to have children for a period of 20 years. In a world where people, men especially, are not able to be monitored, we need to compel everyone on the planet to register and take an IQ/EQ test and be sterilized on government expense if they do not qualify to procreate. In order to qualify to procreate, people should pass an online IQ and EQ test, followed by a medical approval. There may not be discriminated against anyone, nor may rich people buy their way in. Everyone should be allowed to take the test only once, and the questions should be different each time, so that people are not able to cheat the system. This should be followed by a medical examination. We should eliminate people that do not like to follow rules and prevent the unwanted effects of evolution in humans like autism and ADHD or antisocial behavior, no matter how genius that person might be. We need to create a safe and functional society where everyone would get along peacefully and treat each other with respect and love. We want to encourage parents with the best parenting skills to procreate and raise a highly functional society. The test must be taken between the ages of 22 and 38. Successful candidates may procreate only where both parents qualify. A one-child policy must be implemented for a period of 20 years, whereafter this one-child policy would be done away with. Children born where the system was cheated may never procreate and must be sterilized. Self-improvement skills must be taught in schools. Teach children Tony Robbins principles in school. Teach kids elocution, cooking, exercise skills, table manners, telephone manners and parenting skills in school. Humans have been breeding species selectively for thousands of years. Horses are bred to be either faster or stronger, hairier or taller. Dogs are selectively bred to be smaller, loving and patient. You do not select a blind horse or one with a genetic disease to breed with. You do not choose the most aggressive dog in the litter to breed a lapdog. Why have humans been selectively breeding animals for thousands of years? But humans, the ones that have the intellect to selectively breed animals to better them, do not have the intelligence to see how necessary it is to irradiate diseases in humans. The human race is currently breeding a race of poverty and suffering. Are humans that small-minded that we cannot see this reality? We are breeding poverty and suffering, and in the process, we are killing our planet. We are going to kill everyone and everything on this planet because we feel sorry for intellectually inferior and emotionally defective or poor-stricken and sick people. Stop the suffering once and for all. It is not harsh, it is merciful. In a world where only a select few individuals are allowed to procreate, I can virtually guarantee there would never again be a war or a rape or a murder or a pedophile. No fraud or corruption. No hate. No racism. We need to make harsh decisions now for the future survival of the planet and the human race. Either everyone are going to suffer in agony, or everyone can thrive, so that future generations can prosper and live a better life than that which our lives are now. It is selfish to resist taking action to reduce the world population now. Within a single generation, all the unpleasantness of this redesign would have been forgotten and life would continue as normal. By allowing only a few selected genetically superior humans to continue on Earth, we would be able to bring world population to below 500 million within a single generation. PR agencies must be employed to educate people that only very few people would meet the requirements to procreate. My vision is that a feeling like a World Cup excitement must be created, in that everyone would know that they cannot all make the teams themselves, but those that fail to make the teams must cheer on the successful candidates. There must be respect and excitement in everyone, those that may procreate and those that may not, to be part of this project. Those that fail the test should not feel like discarded failures. Almost everyone would fail, except for a few chosen ones that will continue for the betterment of the planet and mankind. Brief PR agencies to get the cooperation of everyone, and I can assure you if this is done correctly, people would be happy to stop having children. Everyone would feel like a hero for being part of the solution instead of part of the problem. This world population reduction should not be made into a racial or religious matter. I must caution people not to make this into a superiority and hatred thing. If this is done with superiority and hatred, it would fail and have the opposite effect of what must urgently be achieved. Nobody should be made to feel defective. People are who and what they are. It is not their fault if they fail to pass the procreation criteria. Very few would be allowed to procreate. And wealth, poverty, religion or race must never influence who may procreate and who not. I am sincerely not saying that the poor must not procreate to be nasty. We are heading for a global disaster on an unprecedented scale with global warming. Never before have we been in a position where an evolved species face a population explosion that is going to exacerbate the strain on the planet that is already in crisis because of human interference. The poor are going to suffer the most. People need to face the reality that droughts, tornadoes, cyclones, desertification and every imaginable climate crisis is going to become an everyday challenge in the survival of the human race and the survival of the planet. We need to face the reality that it might very well all end right here forever after an extended suffering by the next few generations of humans. Population growth cannot carry on as it is. Everyone dismisses it because it is too gloomy to think of a future dissimilar to what we have now. We are acting like ostriches. We stick our heads in the sand and pretend that the problem would go away by itself, but this problem is snowballing out of control. It is going to become more expensive to live in a world suffering global warming. Please understand that this is coming from a place of love and logic and not a place of hatefulness. We need to break the poverty cycle once and for all so that we would never have to have people suffering in an endless unbreakable cycle of suffering again. Studying evolution is my passion. I understand it well. A person that is scientifically or mathematically qualified may lack evolution in empathy. What I am saying is that a high IQ does not make you superiorly evolved if you lack empathy, are prone to violence and hatred, or primitive urges or criminal thought. Some people with low or average IQs may be emotionally more evolved than someone that can do math. We need people that are not only intelligent academically, but also emotionally mature and evolved to procreate. The more evolved the human, the least they desire aggression and to solve problems with violence and war. A person can have one evolved quality but lack many other necessary qualities where they haven't sufficiently evolved yet. Low-brow Neanderthals had a larger brain than modern humans. However, it is the shape, not size, which is most important in mental abilities. A straight profile results in a larger prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for high-level mental and emotional abilities such as empathy, complex reasoning and planning complex matters in the mind ahead of implementation in practice. EQ or empathy quotient measures to what extent people have evolved to outgrow primitive thinking and emotions. Intelligence is not everything. IQ set aside, there are primitive instincts and more evolved behavior that is measured by people's empathy quotient. This is also referred to as emotional maturity. Primitive instincts mean that some people even of high intelligence are not able to regulate themselves emotionally or morally. They are under-evolved in these areas, even though they have a sufficient intelligence. People with primitive instincts are prone to violence, jealousy, hatred, a false sense of superiority, criminal thought, revenge, impulsive behavior leading to rape, murder, gambling, overeating, alcoholism and vandalism. People with a low EQ are aggressive, pessimistic and hateful. People whose primitive instincts dominate lack empathy and nurturing qualities which make them bad parents. They do not care for social behavioral norms like picking their nose or touching their privates in public. Some see no problem with littering, dilapidation, vandalism and an unsightly planet. Some are emotionally numb and unable to feel empathy for others or for the pain of animals. Low EQ people are often pessimists and aggressors. They tend to hold grudges and hate. They often seek revenge and are seldom content or happy irrespective of their circumstances or standard of living. Low EQ people are often unconscientious and inconsiderate and take no pride in their work. They sometimes strive to get away with doing the absolute minimum in their employment and personal environments. They are sometimes seen as clock watchers and take no ownership or responsibility in their jobs. It is crucial to disqualify individuals that lack emotional maturity and that are driven by primitive emotions. People with a high EQ are loving and compassionate irrespective of their circumstances or standard of living. High EQ individuals are pacifists and agreeable. They want to solve problems democratically. Agreeableness is a catch-all phrase for altruism, empathy, cooperation and compassion. People with high EQ are conscientious workers that take pride in their work. They work fast and aim to do everything as well and thorough as they can. They are optimistic and generally happier and more balanced people. People with high EQ make better parents than people with a low EQ. High EQ people are more content with life. High EQ people have unusually large brain structures involved in executive powers like future planning and following complex rules. Following complex rules and complex problem solving must be included in the tests. High EQ and high IQ both stem from a larger volume prefrontal brain, but many high IQ people lack EQ and vice versa. We need to encourage only people with both high EQ and IQs to procreate. We need problem solvers to procreate and problem seers to stop procreating. I know I am not allowed to say this, but I am going to say it anyway, even though I myself cringe at how cruel and unfair this sounds. If it wasn't for global warming and the looming overpopulation crisis, I would not even have uttered anything this unfair. Some humans come from an ancestral line where both parents have had either tertiary or formal educations or skilled jobs for hundreds of generations. The gap between people's evolvedness is ever widening. Technology and access or restriction to the internet is widening this gap. Education and prosperity go hand in hand. The only reason I am saying this is because I believe that we need to eradicate poverty. And unfortunately this would never happen as long as there are humans that are caught in circumstances that keeps them from evolving as fast as other more fortunate people do. By keeping women uneducated for centuries, we created a less evolved human species. Unfortunately, uneducated people produce less intelligent offspring. If an educated man procreates with an uneducated woman, their offspring will only have half the evolutionary intellect benefit that it would have had if both parents were educated. Furthermore, people should only procreate after their studies have been completed, because this is how evolution works. In order to benefit from evolution, people need a minimum education which is suggested should not be less than tertiary level. A first-generation tertiary educated person will not magically super-evolve past a 100th generation both parents educated or skilled person. Evolution takes time. However, evolution is happening faster in all races thanks to technology. But cruel as it sounds, evolution happens faster in prosperous high-demand job humans and slower in the unemployed and those trapped in minimum wage jobs and poverty that does not require higher mental function planning and problem solving. Human beings are not all evolving at the same rate. Human beings are rapidly busy evolving into thousands of subspecies. Soon these subspecies would not even be able to mate with each other. People regress when they become obsessed with primitive behavior, aggression and an obsession with violence. Sex and war are primitive behaviors that causes humans to evolve into freaks. Violence and bad behavior in the film and computer game industry are not helping evolution. Primitive behavior should be eradicated. We must get away from a war mentality. The more under-evolved the person or group of people, the more they are inclined towards wanting to solve problems with aggression. Rape, murder, theft, arson, vandalism and hatred are primitive instincts. We must stop people filled with hatred and primitive instincts to procreate. Minimum wage jobs make people evolve backwards. Brain-dead jobs make people less and less intelligent. The gap between people that are sixth-generation tertiary degree challenging jobs and low IQ people are becoming bigger and bigger. It is cruel to allow low IQ people to believe that they have the same capability for a financially well-off future as intelligent people, because this seldom happens in practice. Children in first world countries are often born from parents where 10 generations of both parents have had tertiary educations. It must not be held against anyone that they are super-evolved or under-evolved. The moment this evolution gap becomes associated with hatred and finger-pointing, this argument can be buried as a lost cause. People should never feel that they are better or worse than other individuals. They are just different through circumstances and no fault or superiority of their own making. We need to create a safe environment where failing the procreation test should not be stigmatized. Everyone should be applauded that they are part of a solution of a much higher cause. Even the prisoner or pedophile that chooses to sterilize or euthanize themselves should feel and know that they are doing a wonderful deed for future generations that deserves an applause from everyone. PR agencies must aim to get everyone on the planet to work towards the same cause, and in the process feel great about being part of a solution as opposed to part of the problem. Our planet is suffering under the burden of the current population. People with underdeveloped ventromedial prefrontal cortexes lack in the area of moral decision-making, emotional processing and adherence to social norms. This is exactly where the population is currently exploding under people that lacks morals, empathy and higher reasoning. People that are underdeveloped in this area make worse parents and life partners, which leads to a decline in quality of life. Many of these children grow up as orphans, which causes the development in these crucial brain areas to evolve slower instead of faster. Sorry to put it so blunt, but this is what science has found and not my opinion. An emotionally under-evolved person or society wish to solve all problems with war and violence. They hold grudges and believe in revenge. Emotionally mature people and societies want to use diplomacy and democracy to solve problems. This is where the world's biggest problem is going to lie in future. Emotionally evolved intelligent people are going to want to avoid war at all cost, while emotionally under-evolved people are going to want to solve all problems with violence and war. This is currently happening. Evolved humans bend over backward to avoid conflict and give in to every demand of the masses. They will do anything to avoid conflict, but under-evolved people's lust for conflict will never be satisfied by getting what they demand. They want conflict. Listen to me, they have an instinct that want conflict at all costs. Be aware of the population explosion under bloodthirsty conflict-seeking individuals and societies. This is a time bomb and a huge problem where some evolved societies are staring to move away from wanting to solve every problem with war. War is going to come their way. It is not only going to be under-evolved versus evolved, but under-evolved versus under-evolved. There is serious conflict brewing. There is a tendency under-evolved humans to advocate that all humans are the same. Evolved humans do not enjoy discriminating, but under-evolved humans sincerely believe that they are superior in every way. Be careful of this. In addition to global warming and an extreme overpopulation crisis, there is a bigger problem brewing: constant never-ending war. At this point it would be too late to apply my solutions suggested. At this point not a single person on the planet would prosper ever again. I need you to let this sink in. Soon not a single person on the planet would prosper ever again if we do not curb the population growth immediately. Humans need to be aware of this. We are going to face uprising after uprising, rebellion after rebellion, revolution after revolution, because the minority is living in luxury and the ever-growing masses is going to live in worse and worse poverty. Please understand, the lower-income masses are going to explode in numbers in a world where we already do not have enough food and water, and where we are facing erratic weather, droughts, tornadoes, cyclones and extreme weather, famine, water contaminations, etc. We are heading for a disaster on an unprecedented scale. We need to act now. People are in love with the idea of becoming parents, but being a parent is hard. I know that for many parenthood stays a lifelong joy, but for too many others it becomes a huge financial and emotional strain. People worry themselves sick that they wouldn't be able to provide, or that their children are not performing well enough in school, or are being bullied or exposed to drugs and wrong influences. People need to realize that by not having children they can live a very fulfilling and joyful life. More money for yourself and essentials. Just think on how much you will save by having smaller accommodation, time for yourself, etc. Raising children is expensive and tiring. It is not all moonshine and roses. For some it is a pleasure, but for most it becomes really stressful and exhausting and financially unaffordable. Leaders have in the past stigmatized suicide. Not long ago suicide was a crime punishable with jail. The church declared it was a sin against God, and the church refused to bury people that committed suicide. Later suicide was treated as a mental illness. The reason suicide was stigmatized was because leaders needed worn out, tired, hungry, injured and suffering soldiers to fight and not let them down when battles were fought in the past. It is time to move on from that primitive reasoning and to allow people to decide for themselves whether they wish to continue to live in pain, poverty and suffering. There is nothing wrong with deciding to make a graceful end to your life rather than to continue in suffering. People's perceptions regarding suicide need to be changed with PR campaigns. By allowing people for whom life has become too much to choose euthanasia because they are either in pain, or hungry, lonely or otherwise unhappy or distressed, we can reduce the world population virtually immediately to below approximately 2 to 4 billion. Please, I am not saying take your grand to the vet like a dog to be put out. I am saying that there is a difference between living and existing in excruciating pain, agony, hunger, fear and uncertain circumstances. Give people a choice to choose to make a painless and humane end to their suffering. Every human being should be allowed the choice of a humane and pain-free euthanasia under general anesthesia in their closest hospital or clinic. I want to emphasize that my suggestion is that this is always voluntary, and never against anyone's will. Anyone that doesn't qualify to procreate must be allowed to live out their years until natural death. Elective euthanasia should, however, be made available to everyone for whom life has become too much. The taxpayer should foot this cost, which must be kept low. It doesn't have to be expensive anesthesia. Any gas or pill or injection that can kill a person stress-free and pain-free should be used. This should be done with no red tape. Walk into a hospital, sign a form, scan your ID, have 2 hospital officials witness your request, lie on a bed, receive anesthetic from a nurse. This process should take 5 minutes and should not be refused because of red tape, like if someone doesn't have an identity document. PR campaigns should educate people about the fact that the poor and unemployed are going to suffer the most in future. By choosing euthanasia, they are making life for future generations possible. They are giving a gift to humanity for which future generations would be eternally grateful. Machines are already replacing manual labor, and this tendency will continue to happen. There will in future not be employment for anyone that doesn't have a tertiary education. Nobody would be forced to be euthanized. Everyone should be allowed to live their lives out. They just may not procreate. In a world where we insist on making prisoners suffer for their crimes, even though this costs trillions, there is something fundamentally wrong with a society that takes away prisoners' belts and shoelaces to make sure that they do not make an end to it. We don't ever want prisons again, and we should not allow people that are criminally minded to procreate ever again. All people, including prisoners or people that are awaiting trial, should be allowed to choose euthanasia at any time that they wish. Prisons make people worse. Prisons are inhumane and it costs money that should be appropriated toward much better uses like education, hospitals, and safeguarding against global warming. Again, we live on a planet that has never faced a problem of global warming together with a population explosion before. We are sitting on a time bomb. People that say that I am an alarmist and that the crisis is not as big a problem as I make it do not know what they are talking about. The population is about to explode. Really explode. Not double, I mean increase thousandfold. Let that sink in. For every 1 person currently on Earth, there is within a couple of short years going to be 1,000 people. This is how compound interest work. And this is how population figures work. And the majority of these people are going to be of lower intelligence, which automatically means poor. This is dangerous. People need to wake up before it is too late. It might already be too late. Our planet is dying and suffering, and it already cannot sustain the amount of people currently on it. In a future with less than 500 million people, everyone will live prosperous. We need to redesign everything on the planet so that people can work smarter and not harder. We need low-maintenance houses, gardens, cities and factories. Nobody must do manual labor. We will not only survive global warming, but we will reverse or slow the strain that we are putting on our planet. We need to design a future without rape, murder, bullying, war, corruption, dishonesty, discrimination or hate, without hunger, fear or pain, without pollution and strain on the planet's resources. In a future with less than 500 million people, even the poorest person on the planet will stay in a designer house, wear designer clothes, dine in restaurants, and have money to pay their bills and go on holiday with. People will eat clean, healthy food without chemicals, preservatives or pesticides. Everyone would be attractive, happy and healthy. Education up to tertiary level would be funded with taxpayers' money. Every child should receive a Harvard quality education paid for by the state. This is what a future with 132 billion and counting would look like if we don't all work together towards this common goal. With the 132 billion people on Earth, people would starve. There would be constant war and violence. Humans would not be buried. They would just be eaten of left to rot. Disease, stench and pollution will be part of everyday life. The rich would all be killed. Everyone would be hungry, thirsty, poor, and suffering. Experts should control the impact of this population reduction on the economy and manage and prevent disasters and crises pertaining to the implementation of this radical plan. The UN should prohibit the manufacture, import and export of substandard goods that ends up on landfills with immediate effect. Countries should not be allowed to continue to pollute and accelerate global warming with the manufacture of worthless sub-quality goods. Military force must be used against countries or people that refuse to cooperate. There must be a law against advocating or speaking out against saving humanity and the future of planet Earth. We cannot delay in implementing these drastic measures, because else all life on this planet is going to suffer and die in agony. People should make living wills to be painlessly euthanized, and where patients are not able to decide, doctors should be able to make that decision for them. Estates of persons dying without heirs should be forfeited to the state, and people should be begged and encouraged to donate money towards this world population reduction plan. Corruption should be eradicated. Politicians should not be allowed to earn unrealistically high salaries, or act in competition with the duties of their office. I realize the measures herein are controversial and extreme, but desperate times call for desperate measures. We do not live in a perfect world. We live a world facing the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced. In a world with 132 billion plus people, everyone would suffer. It wouldn't matter whether you are rich or poor. There will not be food, water, oxygen or sanitary living conditions. There will be anarchy. Everyone would rape and murder. No one would be employed, because people would not be able to move around on this overcrowded planet. People will be sick with known and new diseases. People would murder each other for a breath of fresh air or a drop of water. They will cannibalize each other. The planet would rot with defecation and rotting corpses that could not be buried because people would occupy every square meter on this planet. Vermin, cockroaches, and flies would feed on humans. People would be sick with diseases yet to be born. No one would be safe. Families would become separated from each other in the crowds. People would murder and rape, plunder and destroy. All of this on a dying planet with extreme temperatures, erratic weather and an atmosphere that will be drifting away while the population still increase in number until everyone eventually dies the most horrifically painful deaths after an horrifically painful and sorrowful existence. Please make this video viral and help save our planet.